How's everyone doing? It's very exciting for me to be sitting here talking with Marc, co-founder of Riot Games, and really one of the biggest gaming companies in the world now, and homegrown in LA. So thank you very much for being here with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So maybe for people here who don't play video games or who are not as familiar with Riot Games, can you maybe just set some context on the size and scale of what Riot Games is today?
Sure. And just out of curiosity, any video game investors or esports investors in the audience? All right, a couple. Good. So anybody that plays games in the audience, for a chance? A couple brave hands. There we go. So Riot Games was founded in 2006 by myself and my business partner, a guy named Brandon Beck. And now, we've been fortunate. We've had a lot of success. Our flagship game is a game called League of Legends. By many accounts, it's the largest online PC game in the world. So we have about 100 million monthly active players, about 250 million people that have ever played League. Probably have about 9 million people playing it right this moment. And Riot has grown to have over 20 offices around the world, and we run 13 eSports leagues, which we'll talk a little bit about a little bit later, and about 2,500 Rioters, which is our word for employee. Mostly located here in Los Angeles, but then we have many regional publishing offices to go distribute and publish League of Legends and our other games around the world.
One of the coolest offices I've actually ever visited.
Thank you.
Complete with its own hawks that takes on the residents there.
Yes, we tried to be environmentally friendly with our pest control solution.
So
our first office was very not. We have a 12-acre campus now, so it's pretty. A lot of people like complimenting us on the office because it's pretty cool. But as we like to remind everybody, when we were first getting started, of course, our office was relatively capital efficient, which would mean in VC speak it was pretty shitty.
So what actually motivated you and Brandon to start this company 13 years or so ago? And maybe give us a little bit of sense for what it was like to start a gaming company all the way back then.
Yeah, so the world was pretty different in 2006. This is pre-iPhone. Cloud computing wasn't a thing. Facebook was 2 years old. And so we were essentially hardcore gamers who, after USC, where we went to school, he worked in strategy consulting at a company called Bain. And I worked first in finance and then in business marketing at a company called Advanced Star Communications. And but we were just really hardcore gamers, and we had these back-to-back gaming rigs in our West Hollywood apartment, and we felt deeply underserved by the incumbents in the industry at the time, meaning that the game industry used to primarily derive most of its revenues from a packaged goods style business model where you create a new game that you then sell at retail, and sometimes you would just sell another iteration of that game. Like for anybody that's played Guitar Hero, there would then be Guitar Hero 2, Guitar Hero 3, Guitar Hero Aerosmith, Guitar Hero Metallica. And from our perspective, those types of things would fragment the community. You didn't necessarily want to just go pay another $60 at retail for some incrementally improved features, at best. You just wanted to play Guitar Hero and share songs. And so we wanted to build a company that would put the player first, sort of at the center of the decision making, and build this direct relationship with our audience. And League of Legends was the content thesis and sort of the proof point to the broader long-term strategy around really high-quality core games, as we called them, as a service. And then, of course, League was one of the first free games in the West. And this is before freemium was sort of a well-known model. And of the 50 VCs that we had met with, most told us no. And in fact, one put it fairly succinctly when they were like, wait, so you want to raise, millions of dollars to create a battle arena game where 19-year-old boys are going to be killing each other online, and the way you make money is through cosmetic items where they're playing dress-up doll while they kill each other? And we're like, kind of, but not really. And they're like, yeah, good luck with that, right? As they said no. But Rick Heitzman from First American Capital, who's in the room, or at least was when he was here, thank you, Rick. He courageously raised his hand and helped give us some funding, and we had some success.
How long did it actually take to make the game, and how much capital?
Well, yeah, and for every entrepreneur that's been around it, it's of course a very stressful thing when you're spending a fixed amount of other people's money. And we had the highest burn rate of any company in both Benchmark, who was the other VC that came in for us, and Firstmark's portfolio. And so we started the company in 2006, opened our first office in September, and then we launched League of Legends in October of 2009. and again, with a free-to-play business model. So this was not Pokemon Go, where we're sort of this instant overnight success. We were slightly bigger the month, like first month after we were the previous month, and had this long tail revenue model where it took a while to really get rolling. And so it was very stressful. We thought it was going to take $3 million to build the product. It took us 20. And so it was, the early days were filled with challenges.
Yeah, I mean, just to set some context, this is before the days of low-cost game engines, right, like Unity. This is before the days of very readily available Amazon Web Services to scale your games. I mean, you guys ended up basically building all the back end and the front end and the distribution in addition to actually building this game.
Yeah, well, you're bringing up a great point. So we originally just wanted to be a game developer building the type of content and games that we thought as players we would want to see. And we were originally going to pursue a parallel financing strategy, talking to both VCs, but then also to publishers. But once we talked to the incumbent publishers of the day, they're like, wait, you're not going to have single player? Your game's going to be free? Like, what are you talking about? Single player is what 80% of the players do, and most people never even go online. And so we were like, wow, we can't give these guys the keys to the kingdom because we will then fail, which then meant we needed to take on the responsibility of how do we go build a publishing business. And that meant our scope and complexity increased significantly. It meant we had to go raise money. And, and so that's the same type of story where, I think the data points that we had that gave us the courage or conviction to go take risk and go big in some opportunities we saw was really that player perspective where, we had played thousands of hours of many online games and could deeply relate to some of the pain points of our end users. And the same thing is true with esports, where, over time, it's for us, we were always shocked that esports didn't exist because we always thought that there would be many players like us who wanted to watch other people consume this great content, and we've been blessed to be able to help deliver some cool content like that, which we'll talk about.
Sure. We'll definitely come back to esports a little bit later, but I want to go back to one of the things you said, which you guys have over 2,500 Rioters around the world. So, I mean, we talk a lot about team building at any of our companies, and I've always found in back-end game companies as well that there's this added creative burden that you don't see in a general tech company. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what it means for you guys? Like, what is a Rioter and what makes for a good Rioter?
Sure. So, Ballmer was talking earlier about how, many tech companies essentially have the tech and the business side. And, we have those challenges, but then we also have the creative challenge where we have to make something that really resonates with an audience and is something that is cool and sort of lightning in a bottle. And that's a really difficult thing to do. And so, we've had to, as we started to scale and needed to grow the company, we needed to find ways to kind of institutionalize our values and build an organization where the best creative talent in the world would want to come to do their best work. And that, has been a huge challenge, but something that's a big focus and priority. And so a lot of that meant that we tried to cultivate a culture that was really a service and mission-oriented company where, Rioters, even that word sort of conjures emotion of we are here to make it better to be a player. Meaning that, we as all gamers have felt the pain of trying to, taking a day off from work and you're super excited to go spend a bunch of hours playing a game and the servers are down. And the developer doesn't even communicate to you or tell you what's going on. It's like, for those that don't play games, you need to be on a flight and then the airline is like, sir, get in line, and just, again, is not providing a great user experience. That feels bad. And a lot of this, we've created values over time, that we try to reinforce through both hiring and performance management to screen for people who have player empathy, meaning the desire to relate and capability to emotionally relate to the audience. And then similarly, we have a value, or an attribute around player orientation, which means not just the willingness or emotional desire to connect, but the sort of, if there's like the heart and then the mind, the intellectual capability to relate to the frame of reference for when we do a thing, how will this audience that we care about perceive it relative to all the other things that they're used to, and all the other things that great tech companies are doing. And so that's been, I think, a key part of the success of the company over time is building this resilient organization filled with incredibly passionate people who want to go solve the hardest problems in the industry at a place that really thinks long term.
That's amazing. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, post-launching League of Legends, sort of 5, 6, 7 years into your guys' existence. Tencent was an investor in Riot Games, and then eventually acquired the company over the early 2010s. And you've been traveling there extensively. Both you have huge fan bases over there, as well as obviously with Tencent, et cetera. So I'm kind of curious, what over the years have you observed are some of the biggest differences as well as similarities in terms of how do you mesh this Rioter culture with sort of what people might typically perceive of what a Chinese sort of centrally run tech company mentality is?
Yeah, so I think I don't know how common our experience has been, but I'm happy to recount what our experience has been. So when our VCs in 2011 wanted to go test the market to explore our strategic opportunities, because the company was having success, as I mentioned, we had to raise a lot of capital pre-launch, so Brandon and I didn't control the company. And so when we were going on the roadshow, every American company, media company, game company that we would talk to still had no idea what we were doing and what made it cool. So they would purely look at the financials and whatnot and value the company based on that, which again, we're healthy and successful and growing. But we really thought that a lot of the elements that made the company special relate to our culture, relate to this mission and the way that we sort of prioritize thinking about our players first, and revenue is sort of a trailing indicator for when we do the right things upstream. And it was fascinating to us that, again, a company from China, Tencent, which is one of the largest tech companies now in the world, and and obviously in China, really related to our mission and perspective and really valued it. They invested alongside our VCs in our second institutional round, and their perspective was selling the company way too early. This company's just getting started. They wanted to prevent the company from being sold to a company that, from their perspective, would screw it up, where we'd go report to VP of such and such who'd tell us kids how to do it and then destroy a lot of value. And so the deal that we ended up doing was more analogous to kind of a long-term private equity deal. And it's worked out really well for everybody, where we've grown the company more than 20x since then. And recently we just shared some numbers externally where League of Legends has grossed over $20 billion around the world in the last 10 years since it's launched, which puts it among probably one of the top and fastest growing IPs ever. And so it's worked out.
That's amazing. Wow. So you and I were also talking a little bit about what Peter Zahan was saying earlier in terms of sort of some of the differences between the US and China, et cetera. You guys are one of the first and one of the very few actually examples of sort of cross-border collaboration that's worked out. And then also now recently you're starting to finally see some Chinese companies that are actually entering the Western markets for the first time and seeing successes. TikTok being the one that's currently sort of top of mind for everybody.
Yeah.
But the moment that we're in now is quite different in terms of US-China relationships. When you guys first took investment, 10 years ago versus now, TikTok dealing with all the political tension. How do you think about, is there more opportunity for cross-pollination between companies across two sides? Do you see it centralizing more into their own tech ecosystems?
I think there's a lot of collaboration opportunities between Chinese and sort of Western companies. It was interesting, and I mentioned to Peter earlier, that we're an exporter to China, which is pretty rare. China's our biggest market, actually, and so we're selling billions of dollars of virtual goods just in the Chinese market, and so this trade war that we're having, of course, is quite challenging for us. Where getting the government license to allow us to launch our new games is a very important thing that is somewhat at risk given a lot of the dynamics. But one of the things that's been fascinating also about the exposure to Chinese culture has been, one, just how long-term the sophisticated business leadership and obviously some of the political leadership think, and the implications that has on long-term strategic investment, and also the relationship focus. So rather than being super focused on every single deal term that has been negotiated X number of years previously, there's much more of this sort of symbiotic relationship where it's, unless the relationship is strong and we're kind of constantly rebalancing, then it's off and it needs to be massaged or adjusted or acknowledged or tweaked in some way, just like a marriage. And it's been fascinating to experience that, because in our sort of Western sort of indoctrinated perspective, of course, it's like, well, the deal says X, so therefore it's X. And but I think we've come to appreciate the need to evolve as the circumstances evolve. But I do think that China has some great strengths, and they're also innovating in a lot of interesting ways that I think a lot of people don't give them credit for. And that's a whole other topic.
Right. Yeah. Just speaking of TikTok, I remember when they first came to the U.S., it was all fully run out of China, and it's kind of ironic, given that a lot of times when Western companies went into China, they tended to just bring the Westerners over to run those divisions. And usually those didn't end up so well. And it looks like now they're actually trying to hire a Western head for basically everything ex-China. I mean, maybe it's unfair to ask you, but are you bullish that this might be the first attempt that you have a Chinese company building something that's global, or how do you think about that?
Well, I think that one of the big challenges for Chinese companies going abroad is from a talent perspective, they don't have the management bench, and the sort of like the brand expertise or the consumer expertise and market expertise oftentimes to go penetrate Western markets that are very different than the Chinese market. And so, I think the strategy, which Tencent has, of course, been leveraging very well, is acting more as a holdco, finding what they perceive to be great disruptive companies and trying to partner with them and invest in them to let them go do their thing. And Tencent now owns a pretty good amount of Western gaming companies, including Supercell and 45% stake in Epic, as well as of course owning Riot. And they've been very thoughtful about which companies they back. But I think that a lot of companies that don't have the ability to go penetrate Western markets like many Japanese companies did, if you think of Sony and whatnot that have had great success at cultivating brands, they're going to continue to explore and find ways to go abroad because they're smart, because they have great, massive amounts of capital that they're looking to deploy. And so I think we're going to see more of that.
So you guys really one of the true pioneers of esports across any gaming company. Can you maybe just talk about and highlight what do you think has been the single biggest benefit of having run all of these tournaments, all of these leagues over these years?
We've always thought about esports as a feature, essentially. So, if you just think about the value chain from development to publishing, we thought about it in the same way we think about it as anything else that would add engagement. And so by building an ecosystem of teams and players that are parts of these teams, with great content, where they're competing with other teams, and then of course having these global competitions and making it easier to become a fan where you can watch and follow the content, who's playing. All of these things essentially meant that we always had, our players always had something to talk about. They always had sort of a new player to aspire to, in the same way that the NBA had much lower ratings and much less reach in the early 80s, and say when ESPN came out and really helped grow that audience, as well as say college football. Sports grow and evolve over time, and a lot of it is how you tell stories and how you can build heroes and whatnot. And so we've been really trying to demonstrate that these players have incredible talent. Like the top 1/10 of 1% of players, and those that are pros, would beat people that are in the top 1% 1,000 out of 1,000 times. There's an exponential skill curve. And so players love to watch other people play, not just because they can do these incredible things, but they can learn from them also. And they can someday imagine of them being on stage and being those players. And so we've also created a whole ecosystem with high schools now where you can earn a vice letter. You can go into colleges, and we have deals with 11 different college conferences now where there's scholarships that are being offered. And it's really this global ecosystem. And anyway, it's been a lot of fun. And then, some of the multimedia stuff that you saw in there and some of the original songs, we also have the blessing of creating our own intellectual property and having a lot of great creative talent where, again, it's like there's never been a fight song for esports before, right? And so, we were able to go work with artists who are gamers, who understand the stuff, to then go create some experiences to, again, just enrich what it meant to be a player and to be a fan. And that's why we think we're just getting started, because our competencies are so much stronger now than they have been over the last several years. We now have this massive global distribution, with this massive audience, and players want more. They want more games from Riot. They want more of our intellectual property to show up in different forms of media. And we're really excited to try to go make some impossible dreams come true for our audience.
One thing you said, nowadays with high school and college sort of degrees and varsity letters, that didn't exist back when we were playing games. And I'm kind of curious, how is that being received, right, by the parents, by their peers? Is this, I guess, what we grew up with in terms of playing games, is that really a good thing for you? How much has that changed so far?
So we think it's changing a lot. So we used to get a bunch of letters from parents being like, put in more parental controls because my kid's playing too much. Now we're getting emails being like, hey, my kid has talent, and how do we go develop this? Are there, coaching, ecosystems that they can go to? And that's awesome. Now the government gives, of course, visas for esports athletes, and and the broader media is starting to look at esports and gaming with less disdain. Historically, it's been sort of a fascination piece where we felt like the media was just kind of old people being old and kind of looking down their nose at, or our players really felt like that, and for something that they didn't understand. But that's really starting to change. And so our focus is always, let's build something great. Not go say we're going to be cool. Let's just go do something that's really cool. And but we think that the ecosystem is sustainable over the long run. We're 10 years into League of Legends, and it's bigger than it's ever been. And this is very different than how many esports operate, which are more akin to sort of one-off tournaments or events. That makes it hard to be a fan versus leagues, where again, in the Major League Baseball, like what the schedule is going to be published in advance. And a lot of advertisers and sponsors have started to really figure this out. And so whether it's Nike or Louis Vuitton or Samsung, the premium brands are getting involved in a big way. And that's because it's probably one of the most under-leveraged advertising opportunities in the history of the world because of the major demographic divide. Like, we're literally the largest sport from a viewership standpoint in China. And for the 18 to 34-year-old demographic in the US, we're the third largest sport, which is crazy.
Wow. We have just a little over a minute left. So, last question from me. When you guys started over 13 years ago, you talked a little bit about just how different distribution was back then, how hard it was to actually buy games and play games versus now we have app stores, et cetera. And it feels very much like for the next 10 years, again, distribution is starting to change. Yeah. With cloud gaming, with subscriptions for games. I mean, how is Riot responding sort of to what the next 10 years looks like?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest benefits of cloud gaming is going to be, it's going to be able to have a whole new population of people experience high quality games. So when you do a lot of the processing on the server side and then you stream it to a mobile device, you're not eating up your battery life. I mean, you can have a high fidelity, cool experience that can be, again, running essentially on a different machine. The latency still can be an issue. So if you're having a first-person shooter and you flip the camera around, premium gamers are not going to go flock in the immediate term to these new ecosystems because the quality and fidelity really has to be there. And for people that are really engaged, they're going to be willing to spend money on hardware and go prioritize having a premium experience at home. But there's going to be, again, if you just think about India and the amount of people that have mobile devices, there's going to be hundreds of millions of people that are going to be able to get access to premium content in a way that they've never done before, and we're really excited about that. And then, of course, there's augmented reality, there's virtual reality, and the companies that have the competency to build these virtual worlds that we're all going to be spending more time on over the next several decades are gaming companies. And so I think they're going to have an increasingly important part of the media mix. And then also when AI takes all of our jobs and a lot of young men are out of work, we're going to be thankful that we're not stabbing each other because we're doing it virtually online.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Marc. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kevin.